One of the earliest records we have of a serial killer is the case of a 16th century Hungarian countess named Elizabeth Bathory. Her alleged total death count is in the hundreds, and her crimes range from systematic psychological torture to death and dismemberment. However, one of the most fascinating, albeit disturbing, allegations against her was that she would bathe in the blood of her female victims. Clearly, the Countess was a sadistic murderer who took pleasure in torture and pain. But what's the story with her obsession with blood? How does it relate to our view of vampires in the modern world? And can we call her history's most notorious vampire? We're gonna get into that in this video. Let's go. The most accepted etymology of the word vampire comes from the root of the Slavic word this, which I won't even attempt to pronounce. It is most likely either Serbian or Hungarian in origin. While the word itself has its source in the Slavic region, the oldest visual representation of vampires actually hail from the ancient cultures of the Egyptians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. These drawings, displayed on earthenware pots, drinking vessels, and other day-to-day items, depict the blood-sucking entities as demonic female figures, often in various states of undress, attempting to seduce their oblivious victim. These depictions weren't left in the ancient world either. The Victorians' most infamous vampire, Carmilla, who appears in an Irish Gothic novel from 1872, manifests as the key Victorian villain, the sexually aggressive female. Here, the highly sexualized view of vampires surfaces, marrying sex and aggression, with the key players being vampiric women. Certainly, this combination of eroticism and violence is integral to what the psychiatric world calls clinical vampirism, defined as an obsession with blood. Those afflicted with this incredibly rare psychological disorder often receive sexual gratification from seeing, tasting, and feeling blood. They also usually suffer from either psychopathy or sadism. In its broadest definition, psychologist André Bourguignon proposes to call vampirisms all sexual or aggressive acts, whether or not there is blood suction committed on a deceased or a dying person. This view tends to cover a variety of behaviors, such as necrophilia, necrosadism, and necrophagia. Bourguignon also states, when vampirism is embedded in a psychopathic personality disorder, the potential for extremely dangerous behavior seems compounded. In cases such as these, he notes that complex childhood traumas can trigger violent vampiristic behaviors, and that the subjects often present impulse control difficulties and socialization issues as children. These definitions of vampirism help to combine Gothic myth and psychic reality, and the blending of these cannot be shown more clearly than in the story of Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory's family lineage is one of both nobility and violence. Her ancestors include the King of Poland and a Duke of Transylvania. As was the case with royal bloodlines at this time, Elizabeth's was one rife with inbreeding and incest. Her parents were close relations, most likely cousins, and it is thought that this may have been the source of a number of health problems that Elizabeth experienced as a child, such as epilepsy and hemophilia, which then caused her a tremendous amount of pain and social isolation. She grew up spending much of her time with her aunt and uncle, who were known for practicing witchcraft and devil worship. Her husband, Ferenc Nadasdy, was a prominent member of the Hungarian army and seems to also have enjoyed torturing and killing his servants. Often, he would be the one to instruct Elizabeth on the new and exciting ways to inflict pain that he had learned in his most recent stint fighting foreign wars. Due to his long-standing army career, he was frequently away, leaving Elizabeth on her own to govern their enormous castle. The more she was left alone, the more violent she became, acting out of boredom and isolation. This got even worse after his death in 1604, and she began to use such instruments as the barbed lash and iron tongs. There is an ongoing list of her horrifying schemes, one of the most heinous being her new creation, which quickly became her favorite device, the Iron Virgin. Designed after the Iron Maiden, her invention was a cage molded in the shape of a woman with fitted blades in 5 areas across the body, which would then close in on the poor victim. Legend says that her obsession with blood came in the midst of torturing one of her servant girls, when a speck of the woman's blood fell onto Elizabeth's hand, and she saw the skin tighten and de-wrinkle underneath it. This gave way to her belief that the blood of young, beautiful women would renew her own waning looks and increased age, ultimately making her immortal. Blood was then drained from the woman she tortured, and bathe in it she did. While the stereotypical vampires popularized by Bram Stoker and Edward Cullen drink the blood of their victims in order to sustain life and perpetuate their immortal natures, Elizabeth Bathory added her own bizarre twist to that end. Her sadistic nature and obsession with blood and immortality made her, by definition, a real-life vampire. It was in the year 1611 that Elizabeth's crimes came to light. After having killed all of the young servant class women in her geographical area, she murdered a noblewoman. This was clearly a step too far for the state, who had up until this point turned a blind eye to her well-known dealings. She was put on trial in the same year and found guilty of over 80 counts of murder, which is very likely a modest count. Due to her royal lineage and upper-class standing, she was not executed, but instead forced to be confined to her castle within a bricked room, with no windows or doors and only a small opening for food to be passed through. Her castle, again another name I refuse to butcher, has become a ruin, but it is still beautiful and still standing. You can actually pay €3 for a tour of the serial killer's lair. Now that's a great deal. Who doesn't love a bargain? Thank you so much for watching this video. As always, if you did enjoy it, please do comment, like, and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.